With this photograph, I want to take a look at how we can experiment with color by using curves and hue saturation and color balance in order to come up with some potential different options for a photograph. This is a portrait that I captured of Jeff Johnson. He's a renowned climber, writer, surfer, skateboarder, and this particular portrait was published as a full page in Surfing Magazine. And in submitting the image, I wanted to give the magazine a couple of different ways to work with this. So let's take a look at two different ways that we could process this image. Well, here's the photo as it was captured. What I first want to do is bring out a little bit of the warmth. In order to do that, we'll go ahead and click on the hue saturation adjustment icon. Then we're going to use a technique where we colorize the photograph. We bring up that red amount, find just the right saturation there, and take this to a blending mode of soft light. Now, a lot of times when we do this, we'll see an interesting effect. And in this case, it's interesting, it's just too strong. So what I'll do next then is lower the opacity. I'm going to lower the opacity probably down to about 50%. Again, I want to keep this looking really natural. Here's that before and then after. I like the tone on the sweater especially. The next thing I want to do is simply brighten the image up. The contrast added some density there. So I'm going to brighten this file by clicking on the adjustment layer icon and using curves. And here we'll simply apply just a standard little curve there, brightening up our midpoint. Here we have that before and then after. Well, at this juncture, I like how it brightened the image except for the hat. The hat I want to be really deep in red. So to fix that, we'll go over to our mask panel. We'll choose color range, and then we'll simply click on the hat and then hold down the shift key and continue to click and drag there. So hold down the shift key and just click and drag across that. We'll lower the range so it doesn't affect other colors there. Want to make sure we have localized color clusters turned on and just get a pretty decent selection of this hat here. Next, hold down Option or Alt to subtract any of these colors from this selection. Again, just removing everything but the hat itself so that we can really focus in on that. And then click OK. This will then create a mask which allows us to control that hat there. Now in this case, it's only affecting the hat. Well, that's the exact opposite of what we want. So here in our mask, we simply need to press Command or Control I to invert that adjustment. So now we have an adjustment which affects every area of the image, but those bright red areas, which happen to be the hat and also the logo on the camera. Whenever you arrive at a place where you have a color treatment that you like, it's almost always a good idea to group those layers together. So let's do that. Here we'll click in our top layer, and then we'll shift click in the bottom layer and press Command or Control G for group, and we'll name this group Option 1. Next, we'll look at our before and after. Here we have it before and then after, kind of bringing out some of those warm tones that we already have. Well, in order to have another option, what we can simply do is create some more adjustment layers. And here, I'm going to go ahead and start off with an adjustment layer, which is color balance. And what I want to do is create a cool option. So I'm going to increase the cyans and the blues, and I'm going to really exaggerate my color here, adding a lot of cyan and blue to this photograph. Now I'm exaggerating because I know in my mind I'm going to try this on a blend mode of soft light. So before I get too carried away, I'll go ahead and change the blending mode here to soft light. Now once I do that, I can start to see how this is going to come together. I can see how those blues are affecting the overall look of the image. In this case, again, I'm going to go into my different areas, different tones, and just look at how I can swing these one way or another in order to come up with some interesting color combinations. And the color combination that I'm going for is something which is pretty muted but has a little bit of a cooler tone to it. So here then, I'll lower my opacity till I find a nice spot for this treatment. Here's that before and then after. Well, next what I'm going to do is use curves. So here I'll click on my adjustment layer icon and go into curves. In my curves adjustment, I can go into these different channels. Starting off in the red channel, I can increase the reds or I can increase the cyan, and that's what I'm looking for, is a bit more cyan there. I can also go to green magenta, bringing in more green or more magenta. In this case, perhaps just a touch of green there, just a little bit. Now in the blue yellow channel, I'm going to look to bring up the blues there by increasing the blue amount. And then finally, I'll go back to the RGB channel. So again, basically you just walk through your channels, making color changes that you think might be interesting. Here I'm going to brighten this image up just a touch and then add a little bit of contrast there by bringing down my black point. Well, at this juncture, this layer is adding some interesting color. what I thought was really blue wasn't really blue enough. So now it's these two layers together which are giving me this interesting result. Well, here though, I feel like I have perhaps the right tone, but it's just too strong. Well, a couple of options. One easy option is to lower the opacity. Just find a nice spot for that. Another great option too is to click on your adjustment layer icon and choose hue saturation, and then control the overall color saturation. Here we can mute things out so we have a little bit more of this cool aesthetic. It feels a little bit more like old film. And what's interesting about this layer is you can reorder this. Let's put it underneath curves. We'll see a little bit different effect, or underneath color balance, and we'll see also a little bit of a different effect. Or bring it all the way back top, and you see that again, it just shifts color in an interesting way. Now here what we might want to do is bring back a little bit of the tone. So in this case, we're just taking the edge off there. All right, well here we have another alternative way for processing this file. Well, let's click in our topmost layer, hold down the Shift key, click in the bottom layer, and then press Command or Control G to group all of our color adjustments together, and we'll name this option 2. Now we have two completely distinct and different ways to work with this file. Here is one way which is kind of cool, and then here's another way which is a little bit more warm. Now one of the reasons why I wanted to go through this technique was of course to explore how we can work with curves and color balance and hue saturation, but it was also to plant a little seed. And that's a seed of the importance of experimentation. You know, sometimes we get fixed on thinking, you know what, this would be a great way to process our image. And this was actually, when I was working on the file, the first way I processed it. This was the first thing I had in mind. I could go with a little cross-processed or muted blue tone look. But then after I did that in my own workflow, I went back to option 1. And this was the one that the magazine went with, and this was the one that I liked better. This one looked so much more intriguing to me. And I liked how the color looked. I liked how it brought out what was there. And so the whole point of that conversation is just to get you to experiment. Even if you really like something, try something else. And sometimes, by simply using these different adjustment layers and a few blending modes, and then maybe by organizing things, you can compare and contrast different looks and feels for your photographs. And ultimately, this can help you come up with even more creative and even more compelling results.